Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live, where we are dissecting and exploring and trying to understand and get out in front of this digital revolution that is changing every facet of our world quite rapidly, quite profoundly. Here in late October, as we get ready to head into the home stretch of 2020, there's been a lot that's gone on this year, a lot that's certain to happen next year that's unexpected and should be very interesting. And one of our monthly guests who's always good at taking a peek around the corner into the future is Sean Ammirati. Sean is a professor in the business school at Carnegie Mellon. He's a venture capitalist, a serial entrepreneur himself. He's an author and also a podcaster. Sean, thanks a million for being back. Always good to see you.
It's great to be here.
So, Sean, there's a few things going on in the world that I think are a little bit crazy. And we've been talking about some crazy things lately. Oracle TikTok is, do you buy customers now and how that goes? But one that's interesting, right? Over the last 4 or 5 days, a very relatively small, $4 billion in revenue. So I don't mean it is small, relatively small company in the Cloud Wars top 10 called ServiceNow. At the end of the first year of sort of a really reinvigorated year from their new CEO, Bill McDermott, got together with IBM, which is about 115 years old, $75 billion in revenue, one of the best known companies in the world. And they got together in an AI deal to help infuse some of IBM's AI technology into ServiceNow's service management tool. So very interesting. I think a good combo for those companies. But I would say there's not a whole lot of people outside of the tech industry who know about ServiceNow.
Right.
Terrific company, definitely high flyer. Most people, I think, who know anything about technology, and even a lot of people who don't know about IBM. But as of this morning, the market cap for ServiceNow is just over $100 billion, and the market cap for IBM is $104 billion.
Yep.
And I know that, market caps are fluid things. They go up and down, in and out, and they might mean a lot. It might mean a little, but I just thought, Sean, that that is telling us something. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think it's telling us a lot of things. I think one thing that it's telling us is, this is, I should say up front, like I'm a fairly passive public market investor myself. I'm not really big on stock picking. I do think there's a lot of leadership and business lessons from the stock market that are interesting to comment on, but nothing I say should be construed as financial advice. There are people who are paid to do that. But I do think what you see with the markets right now is the markets continue to go up, even as the economy at large is I think still trying to find its sea legs here. And I think that what you're seeing is, the markets are always about future profits, not today's profits, but it feels like that has significantly accelerated over these last 9 months. There seems a lot more focus than there ever has been before on, the where the world's heading and that future cash flow from these businesses. And so I think that's where you're seeing some of these companies where it's like, wow, from a revenue perspective, that doesn't, these two businesses, it doesn't seem like they're getting the same premium on today's revenue. Well, I think the markets in general are really looking much further out into the future. And I think ServiceNow, and we talked about this when Bill took that job, right? It's a very interestingly positioned company for the future of enterprise tech. Certainly doesn't have the brand recognition that IBM does. If I were on the leadership team at ServiceNow, that's something that I think they should be thinking hard about. It's probably some time for some kind of thought leadership branding in the same way that, I mean, nobody is, honestly, IBM in the tech space is very, very good at that. They have their own challenges, but they've a long history, as you know, Bob, of doing a great job giving us these handles that can help us understand technology. I think ServiceNow would benefit from that. But when you just think about where the market's heading and the places that ServiceNow plays in, I think that's the first part of it. The other part of it that I think is another interesting lesson here is the market is really valuing there's a real premium on leadership teams and particularly on CEOs right now. And coming from a storied company like SAP, where Bill did a really good job there, I think pretty much uh, it's a just that's sort of just fact, or at least on Wall Street, that's just fact, right? I think there's a real premium being placed on him as the CEO, and confidence in the sort of CEO premium that you're seeing right now. And you see that in a lot of these companies, because what we're experiencing, right, is that there's a lot of uncertainty and doubt in the economy in general right now, and leaders have never been more important. And I think from a Wall Street perspective, again, which is maybe different than Main Street, but from a Wall Street perspective, you see that reflected in the premium that is being placed on some of these public company CEOs right now.
Yeah, Sean, thanks for that perspective, and the and understood your disclaimer about not an investment advisor, but these numbers are just so uh th- well, the headline I put on this morning, I called it market cap madness, and I intentionally do that knowing that it isn't all about the numbers are nutty. And then if you look underneath them, why is this happening? What's going on? As you just described, it's making a lot of sense. And I think ServiceNow's stock price has, if not doubled, it's very close to doubling in the year that McDermott's been there. So to your point about the leadership issue, Sean, I thought one of the fascinating things about this was through this deal, one of the things that IBM gets is sort of a glow with one of the shiniest of all the shiny objects out in the marketplace today. And they get a real live practical, and I think high value use case that they can connect to Watson, which I don't think
Sure.
has a whole lot of those in its pocket to pull out right now. And then for ServiceNow, they get access a little bit, Sean, in that way of what you talked about last episode about network effects, right? And I know it's not exactly the in the context of which you mentioned it before, but all of a sudden now ServiceNow has access to the IBM account base. And
Right.
these partnerships that are taking place now are allowing these levels of scale for relatively small companies going in one direction, and then the exposure that IBM gets is maybe taking some of its pretty cool stuff and tying it in with somebody else's pretty cool stuff to give it a bit of a glow. So these partnerships that we're seeing these days, I think, are fascinating, and I think we're going to see more of these outside the precedent that's always existed in the tech industry.
Yeah, I mean, again, Bill's a great CEO. He doesn't need advice from a VC and business school professor. But I'll give him some more free advice, because so I think one is like do that branding campaign, right? Like people need to know ServiceNow. That the brand recognition is just not where it needs to be, and I think there's thought leadership opportunities there that are quite compelling. The other thing is, let's be realistic. That stock is great currency he has right now, and he should go play offense. If he's not thinking about the companies that he can go acquire with the relatively uh, highly valued stock that he's got right now, that he's not doing this right. There, tying things up with IBM makes a ton of sense, but there's a real opportunity, I think, for him to accelerate the vision that he laid out, which we talked about, I guess, almost a year ago now when he joined, right? And it was pretty exciting actually at the time. But there's a real opportunity to not only build that, but also to buy and accelerate his way into that. And he's got he can give up a much smaller percentage of ServiceNow doing that today, given the premium that his stock has appreciated over the last year, and as you put it, the market cap madness that he's dealing with right now. And I think you've seen other people in the tech space do that well when their stocks have had these pops, and I think it's a real opportunity for ServiceNow right now.
Yeah, Sean, one of the other things that Bill McDermott did when he went over to ServiceNow, he said, we're going to focus on some vertical industries or industry specific opportunities that he knew well from his time at SAP. And I think in the larger sense, it isn't just he's taking the SAP playbook and rolling it into ServiceNow, but the times are calling for more of this sort of thing. So I wanted to ask you broadly about this new wave of what are being called industry specific solutions, from and the companies that are putting these up, right? It is breaking down some of the boundaries where in the past. I think everybody, get in your place, know your place, and don't stray from that place, right? If you make infrastructure, go do infrastructure and leave the apps to other people. Well, Google Cloud and Thomas Kurian really kicked open the door to this industry specific thing using tons of AI and ML. Well, they're an infrastructure guy, aren't they? And then you see SAP jumping in with the industry cloud saying, no, we're the apps provider. Microsoft's doing some of it. I even think Amazon, this very interesting deal they did with Carrier. It came as close as anything I've seen from Amazon of sort of tiptoeing up to get into this solution space where they're tying their IT expertise with Carrier's operational technology expertise. So what I wanted to ask you about on this is, I think we're seeing a point at which a lot of these companies are sort of shedding their old skins, these cloud providers, and saying, I can be more than what I've been in the past because the opportunities now are so big and broad and wide open.
And because it's what their customers want,
Yeah.
right? Like customers don't think about they don't think about markets the way the cloud technology providers have talked about them. You know, what CEO on the golf course at Augusta is saying, I really need to fix my cloud infrastructure, but I don't really care as much about my ERP solution. It's much more about the cloud infrastructure, right? And I think that is a very technology myopic way to look at these markets, right? And what you're seeing is, and I think to your point on TK, right? Like what you're seeing is when guys come in who are obsessed about customers, what customers, all of a sudden, you can call it shedding, but I mean, to me, it's even more just like the blinders come off and it's like, oh, well, this becomes pretty 101. Let's figure out what customers want and let's give it to them. And what customers want is they want solutions, and they want solutions for the businesses that they're in and the industries that they operate in. And I think you see that across each of the companies that you mentioned. I think the Amazon thing is interesting because, I continue to maintain, we're getting to the end of the year and this prediction is looking not great, but I continue to maintain that, that there's insanity in Washington State if Amazon does not spin AWS. I mean, I just had another call this week with a small, just $100 million, but a small cloud company, and they're taking, even that group is taking market share away from Amazon by saying, do you really want to fund your competitors? Like that business is worth significantly more unshackled from the rest of Amazon. But anyways, I think this, coming back to your question, like this point is absolutely that it's I think the next step in this digital transformation, this cloud transformation, whatever you want to call it. But it's because what's happening is the people who are leading these organizations are doing the basic blocking and tackling that they should be, which is they're moving out of these conversations, IT director to vendor, and they're stepping up a level, and it's C-suite to peer, right? And when you talk at that level, they don't talk about the tech stack, or they talk about the problems they have and the solutions to those. And those solutions are, they're more verticalized, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Sean, it's interesting too. If you look at this, you got Thomas Kurian, who you just were mentioning, going from Oracle, a legacy company, over to Google. You get Bill McDermott going from SAP, a legacy company, over to ServiceNow. And as you said, sort of shaking things up, getting that outside in view of what customers want and need. And then one of my other sort of favorite here, cliches and all of this, or how, some people tend to pigeonhole folks. Larry Ellison comes in and he takes sort of a totally different view, right? Like you were saying, Sean, about this. And I think we're seeing, thank goodness, a deconstruction of the tech industry led market segmentation of, there's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. And Larry has just pretty much bulldozed that. And he said, nah, he said, nobody's specifically putting money out saying, I want to buy platform stuff. He said, they
Right.
want to buy apps or they want to buy infrastructure. So he just collapsed the platform thing, never said that, just stopped talking about it. He took all his platform stuff, including one of the most valuable franchises in the world, the Oracle database, plopped it in infrastructure and just said, hey, there's the new game. These are the new rules. Here we go. because people want this and they want this. So I just think this has been wildly refreshing. And Sean, if I could babble on one more second here, I'd say, it was interesting when I really started getting into the, creating stuff with Cloud Wars, and especially the Cloud Wars top 10, people would say, no, 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 you can't do that. You
I
can't
remember.
compare a SaaS company with an infrastructure company with, all this stuff. And I said, well, if you look at it from the point of view of the customers, they care about which company is going to be most helpful to them, not which one inside the bubble has, more of this or that four-letter acronym. So I just think this is such a welcome change. It's really going to be great for business. And I think it's giving confidence to the customers that this cloud stuff's okay, because we got actually some, some wise leaders directing this in the right ways now.
I think that's exactly right. Maybe to give people an easy analog to think about this, right? You know, when you think about your home and how your home has become more digital, you don't really think about it as like, oh, you know, what's this component? I got to think about my home digital security system, and I got to think about my home digital assistant system, and I got to think about my cell phone and the wearables that it, right? Like, we don't tend to think about that way. We tend to think about it's like, what's the ecosystem I'm going to tap into, right? So, am I going to be running on top of the Alexa platform? Am I going to be running on top of am I going to use all the different Apple devices, right? And we have phrases to describe these things, right? Even non-technical people like, oh, I'm a Apple fanboy or whatever. But what's that really a proxy for? That's a proxy for, okay, I'm going to use Apple wearables, Apple home devices, Apple cell phones, right? I'm Apple TV. I'm going to sort of just use their whole platform. And so I think the way to think about it is not like, oh, who owns the home security market? Although that would be kind of historically how we've done it. It's like more, what tech company has share of home, like what percentage of home goes to Amazon versus Apple. And I think you're going to see the same thing happen in the cloud space, right? It's not going to be like, well, who has the share of infrastructure? It's like, well, what percentage of the digitization problems that I have in my business am I trusting ServiceNow to solve? Am I trusting Oracle to solve? Am I trusting Google to solve, right? And I think it's unlikely to be 100% in any of those buckets, but what you're going to see is areas where it's seemed in the past that there were clear, territory markings are going to get very, very blurry in 2021.
Sean, that is a great point. I want to come back to that in just a second, but first we want to present a word from our sponsor, BMC. BMC wants to know, is your business on its A game? That's when systems are intelligent by learning from markets, where automation is paramount yet effortless, and when technology and people work as one in an enterprise. The A game is your business at its absolute best. BMC calls this the autonomous digital enterprise. Find out more at bmc.com/A game. Yeah, Sean, that's a great way to put it. And I think this is such a welcome business-oriented change, and moving farther away from the really, as you put it, the blinders and the constricted view of things that the tech industry and industry tends to have in the early days, when it is maker driven instead
Yes.
of customer driven. Sean, there's one other, interesting thing, from this week that I wanted to ask you about before. Then I hope if you'll have a chance to chat a little bit about your corporate startup lab event. Um, 2, 3, maybe it was 4 months ago, but Amazon launched a new division within AWS for space and satellite technology. Pretty interesting. The way that they got out front was pretty cool. So yesterday, Microsoft gets into that same thing, the space market. And I felt that the way Microsoft introduces some of the language they used, both some of the detail that they went into, I think what they were trying to say was, huh, Amazon might have got there first, but we're going to get there best, biggest. They were really out trying to say, this is big, this is broad, this is end to end. So I just wanted to, if you had seen much about this, and what you think about this. It's sort of the space race 2 coming along here.
Yeah. So, I mean, space is interesting frontier tech, right? Like, it's clear that, that it's an area that first of all, it's an area that a lot of the people leading a lot of the large tech companies, especially newer tech companies, care a lot about Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, all of that, right? So you have people who care a lot about it, which I think is just mind share in the boardroom. I think there is some brand value to it, and I think it is potentially a massive market, although certainly a Horizon 3 market, to be fair right now, right? I don't suspect any of them are expecting it to change their earnings in the next couple quarters, what happens in space tech. But I think going back to this, hey, Wall Street's valuing the future more than they ever have before, right? You can make interesting cases that although it's Horizon 3, if it ever becomes Horizon 1, it becomes a meaningful part of these businesses quickly because there's a large opportunity there. So I think that makes a ton of sense. I also think that, frankly, from a talent perspective, it's a thing that a lot of the talent that those companies are trying to recruit care a lot about. One of the interesting proxies that I spend a lot of attention at Carnegie Mellon is when I spend time with different students and different programs at CMU. I always try to get a sense, like, what's the company that, all other things being equal, the students would go work for them versus any of the other companies. And it's fascinating to watch over time how companies have come in and out of favor on those lists, right? So it wasn't that long ago that a job at Facebook was like a dream job. We certainly still send plenty of students to Facebook, so I want to be careful here. But it is not the dream job that it once was, right? Like the concept of going to work for Facebook is not what it once was. And this is just a data point of one. But I had one student tell me that he felt like going to work for Facebook today would be like going to work for Philip Morris, right? Which is, I think, an extreme, but it gives you a sense like how some of these brands that were once pristine aren't quite as pristine anymore. You're certainly seeing a bunch of interesting things there, but SpaceX in the last probably 2 years has been like the fastest riser on that list of, like, man, if I could work anywhere, I'd love to work at SpaceX, right? And I do think that the tech companies who are in, even in this economy, they are in a battle for talent, pay attention to this. And so I think there's a bunch of intangible benefits to companies talking about the things they're doing here, not the least of which sort of employee recruiting brand benefits as well.
That's a great insight there, Sean. I think especially, your firsthand experience with some of the world-class students at CMU gives you an interesting perspective on that. And then also from the companies, right? You want to be positioned, tilting forward or leaning into where things are headed as opposed to where they've been. So very cool. And along those lines, Sean, if you'd like to share some thoughts, I know that last year you had a big in-person event at Carnegie Mellon,
Yep.
sort of the Corporate Startup Lab Live,
Yeah.
and you've got one coming up next month, I think, right? That you'll be
That's
doing
right.
virtually.
We're going to do it virtually. It's November 4th through the 12th. You were gracious enough to come and help us out last year, and you're coming back again, which I really appreciate, Bob. And one thing that may be particularly interesting to this audience is we have all the digital all-stars, for all the Cloud Wars digital all-stars, doing a Cloud Wars live together. So last year, if you were subscribed to Cloud Wars, you would have heard a conversation between myself, Bob, and Tony Upoff, which was just a ton of fun. But this year, because it's virtual, I mean, there's a bunch of downsides to these conferences being virtual instead of in person, but because it's digital, we have this opportunity to get all of them together for a conversation for an hour, which should be a lot of fun. We also have speakers like Seth Godin, who's a well-known marketing author. We've got John Santelli, who's the CIO of all of United Healthcare Group. Bob, you're actually gonna interview John for us. So a bunch of different conversations. Steve Blank and Alexander Osterwalder, who Alexander created the business model canvas. I'm going to do a fireside chat with those two. So it should be a really great event. It's free. So if you just go to corporatestartuplab.com and click on the 2020 forum, you'll see a link to register for free, and you can join over the internet wherever you are.
corporatestartuplab.com.
That's right.
Sean, and how do event organizers like you, how do you deal in the virtual world with swag? I mean, where am I going to get a coffee cup or a backpack?
Not a backpack, but we are doing swag. What we'll do is we're actually going to ship a little bit of swag to everybody's house. One of the fun pieces of swag that we're doing is because I think the thing that's missing, so there's a bunch of good things on these virtual events, but I think the thing that you miss on the virtual events is the serendipitous, like, hallway conversation. I always feel like when you do an event, and obviously, Bob, with your history, like, you've done a lot more of these than I have, but I always feel like there's this magical thing that happens, which is interesting conversation on the platform. But then where it gets really interesting is what happens at the coffee bar or at the evening reception after that content. And that content almost becomes like the griddle for the conversation between the attendees, right? It's like a jumping off point for people to have interesting conversations. That's really hard to replicate in an online event, but we're using this platform called Run the World, which allows us to do these sort of like virtual kind of networking conversation times as well. And so Friday night of between the first and the second week, we're going to do like a virtual happy hour for everybody on that platform. So the idea is that people can log in and with a mocktail or a cocktail, whatever they prefer, have a little bit of conversation. So we're going to be shipping like little CSL rocks glasses to all of the attendees to try to encourage them to come to that Friday night conversation and bring some of this magic that happens in-person events back to these online events.
Sean, that sounds great. I mean, the event itself is going to be world class. You always do great, great things there. And now with some of these extra wrinkles that, are thrown in as we learn more about how to optimize virtual events to give those personal interactions that you talked about, that's terrific. And that's corporatestartuplab.com. Sean, any final word about anything before we wrap up?
No, I would just say that, like, I mean, hopefully it's a small example of it, but hopefully it's an example that we've been talking about all year, right? The goal is not to reopen, it's to reimagine. And so when myself and Lou Masanti, who you've known for a long time and helps me with this event, sat down to plan the forum this year, the goal wasn't just to replicate what we'd done in person, but it was kind of to reimagine what a forum could look like in this digital way. And so hopefully we'll have done that. And I've just been saying this for a while now, but my encouragement to all of your audiences in the businesses that you're in, I just hope you guys also find opportunities to really reimagine your businesses in these challenging times.
Great. Great. Sean, I have been for the last few years trying to reimagine my golf game, but I still seem stuck on replicating. And so anyway, you and I'll have to chat about that sometime. But Sean, thanks a million. It's always great to see you. Best of luck over the next few months as you roll into your big event.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks to all of you folks for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. Hope things are going well. We look forward to seeing you next time.